self-consumed, self-serving mirror hog is not a leader.
On that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice.
Is a charging decision imminent in the classified documents case?
I would think so.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. As you saw, the Republican 2024 field is growing again, with former Vice President Mike Pence officially announcing his bid today, along with North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. In his campaign kickoff speech in Iowa, Pence took direct aim at his former boss, accusing Donald Trump of abandoning conservative principles on abortion. He also said the former president, quote, endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol on January 6th.
But the American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice. I chose the Constitution, and I always will.
For more on a big day, we bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Robert Costa. They both join us now. Caitlin is CBS News' political correspondent, joining us right here in studio. Bob is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent, right there in Des Moines. I'm going to begin with you, Bob. But first, let's hear some of what Mike Pence told you and his former chief of staff, Mark Short, told you today in Iowa.
Took on President Trump and January 6th election. Why was that so important? It's time. It's time.
I think there's been a lot of misperceptions about January 6th. I think Mike Pence has always said that he's a constitutional conservative. It is important for him to stand on the rule of law. And I think it was important to correct the record on several fronts. But I think equally important was to talk about how much he admires the record of the Trump-Pence years, but that candidly, since the administration ended, Donald Trump has veered away from conservatism.
Feels like any other year, the former vice president joining a presidential race would be major news. Did you get the sense, Bob, this was beginning with a bang or with a thud for Mike Pence?
Scott, as someone who has so deeply covered the Capitol attack, you know the significance of not only a former vice president running against a former president for the Republican nomination, but to have a former vice president talk in blunt terms about what happened that day and to frame the possibility of a future Trump presidency, a second Trump term as a possible threat to American democracy. He said that Trump, in his view, does not respect the Constitution and, in effect, the rule of law that guarantees a peaceful transfer of power in this country. So you see Pence, who has at times shied away from talking about January 6th, took it straight on in his announcement speech. That underscores the significance of his message and his candidacy at this point.
Did you get a sense he wants to or is trying to pivot off that topic? Not a lot of Republican primary votes to be won, taking a hard line on January 6th.
He is not trying to have it dominate his campaign. It's not like he's running only on how he handled January 6, 2021. But it's clear he's not going to run away from it. When we went into the news media filing center at the Pence event, we noticed that the wireless password was that Pence kept his oath, followed his oath under the Constitution to do his job as vice president and help to certify the election in Congress from 2020. And because of that little nod toward January 6th, it was evident to me and other reporters there that Pence is someone who's going to be frank about what happened on January 6th, but he's also making an argument that the Republican Party should move back to how it approached politics in the Reagan era, focus more on conservatism, small government, less spending by the federal government than on populism and what he called the siren song of populism and grievance.
Well, he's in Iowa. Another new contender is in New Hampshire. Christie, former New Jersey governor, starting off his campaign. Caitlin, you were there. What did you make of the opening of the Christie 2024 campaign?
Well, I think what's really interesting is you have this week two candidates in
Pence and Christie, who had a front row seat and an inside view into the Trump administration and how Trump operated. Christie, of course, was a top ally, advised him during debate prep in 2016, helped lead his transition for a time. And now they are both saying it is time to move on. They are both trying to speak to voters who may share that sentiment, who may share the old school kind of Republican values and want something new beyond Trump. But they both have the challenge of this is a different Republican Party now than what they are used to. Christie last night was trying to really position himself as the toughest Trump critic in the race. He held nothing back, went after him at every turn that he could. I talked to several voters in the crowd, most of whom identified as independent voters who were starting to just kind of get a sense of these candidates. And I think that's important in Iowa and New Hampshire. When you talk to voters, they are eager to kind of hear who else is out there. But the challenge, however, is that this Republican Party is just a different kind of party, and they have to kind of navigate that. They're both doing it in very different ways. Pence is trying to draw those contrasts, but not as explicitly. And actually, Christie was kind of poking fun at his other rivals, saying, you know, you talk about turning the page or talking about needing new leadership, but you won't come out and say it. Christie is the one doing it, but also doesn't appear at this point to have a set constituency he can appeal to.
But he really did articulate, didn't he, why he has to go through Donald Trump. Let's play a clip of what he said at the town hall in New Hampshire.
The reason I'm going after Trump is twofold. One, he deserves it. And two, it's the way to win. So these two are not divided. And this is what I don't understand about the coverage, right? Well, I hope he's not just going out there to kill. No, I am going out there. Let me be very clear. I am going out there to take out Donald Trump, but here's why. I want to win.
It's a real small crowd, Caitlin. He's got to get 40,000 people on his side to get into the debate stage and do that. What's the trajectory for that like for Chris Christie? Is that feasible to his team?
It's a difficult one, certainly, and that's why they are trying to get as much media attention as possible. They have to, obviously, all the candidates have to have 40,000 donors, have to be polling at 1% in at least 3 polls. He's very much focused on New Hampshire because of exactly what you just saw. The independent voters, people who he can speak directly to in this kind of environment. But there is this challenge, and I think it will be interesting to see if he does make the debate stage. You know, if these other candidates kind of let him just do the going after Trump, right? Does he provide them any sort of political cover? He'll take the hits while they can kind of focus on their own campaigns. That remains to be seen.
He starts with his strategy being New Hampshire-based. Back in Iowa, Bob, trying to get a sense from Mike Pence whether it's an Iowa first because Iowa's first strategy, or if he feels like Iowa might be make or break for him based on keeping this thing alive and getting it stronger before other states begin.
Scott, after the event, I went up to former Vice President Mike Pence with our CBS News team, and I said, somewhat jokingly, are you going to be moving to Iowa? And he said, well, it's certainly going to feel like that, and I think that is going to be the case. He sees his path to the nomination as not maybe buying a house in Des Moines, but certainly getting a lot of hotel points from one of these hotels here in the area, because he needs to be in Iowa to remind evangelical conservative voters that he's one of them from the Midwest, shares their values, shares their faith in many respects. And he sees a playbook from the past that's appealing to him and his advisors. They look at Mike Huckabee, the former Arkansas governor, in his run in 2008, did so well in Iowa. Rick Santorum, the former Pennsylvania senator, in 2012. Senator Ted Cruz in 2016. They look at all of those experiences combined as a way where Pence, yes, it's going to be slow and steady. Yes, it's an uphill climb. Yes, he might never even get close to winning the caucuses. But if he does have a shot amid coming political chaos, should Trump be indicted or should something else happen politically that's a real game changer, then Pence wants to be ready and positioned in Iowa especially.
Quick question to you, Caitlin. I don't want it to be an afterthought that the governor of North Dakota has declared as a candidate. I'm sorry, is he anything but an afterthought? Is there a different pathway I'm missing?
You don't hear a lot of Republicans talking about him. He's obviously having to introduce himself to a lot of voters, and he did that in a video that looked more like an ad for North Dakota than anything else. But it just goes to show that, there are going to be a lot of candidates in this race, and, how does that affect the front runner? There is a school of thought that the more candidates in this race, the better it is for Donald Trump. But, this is also shows that there is a lot of appetite, at least among Republicans, to at least get out there. And people have different reasons for running for president, right? Some is to boost your name ID, some is to position yourself for another position down the line, and then others actually do want to be president. So we'll see where that falls. But North Dakota looks like a beautiful place to visit.
You're just back from New Hampshire now, and back to D.C. Good work, Caitlin Huey-Burns. In Des Moines, Bob Costa, great work out there as well, and thank you both. A political group that advocates for centrism and bipartisanship is calling for a 2024 unity ticket. A former Democratic congressman joins us next to explain why he thinks there is a path for a third-party candidate next year. You're streaming America Decides.
They're making us smaller by dividing us into smaller and smaller groups. And they sell to you that we should get into these smaller groups because we'll be more comfortable.
Welcome back to America Decides. While launching his White House bid last night, former New Jersey Governor Christie took aim at leaders of both political parties, accusing them of dividing us. Meanwhile, the bipartisan political group No Labels has openly called for a 2024 unity ticket. One of the names being floated is West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who hasn't shied away from open 2024 speculation.
And I want you to come back to talk to us when you make a decision about whether you're running for re-election or that other option you said last time you're leaving open, possibly a presidential.
Everything's open. Everything's on the table. Nothing off the table.
Let's bring in former South Carolina Democratic Congressman Joe Cunningham. He's with us here in studio. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. Good to be here. Appreciate it.
He's National Director for No Labels, and talking about this quite a bit. Let's start off with the baseline question. There's been this concern in 2020 when Howard Schultz, the head of Starbucks, flirted with an independent run for the White House, that he might skew the election results in favor of Donald Trump. You must be hearing that if No Labels is thinking of a third candidate, they'd skew this race toward Donald Trump.
Yeah, and actually just had this discussion about an hour ago. It's a different time right now. I voted for President Biden in 2020. I also voted to impeach Trump when I was in Congress. But I feel like we're in a different time right now where we have, we're coming down the pathway having two presumptive nominees who are so deeply unpopular in this country right now. And at the same time, you have about half of Americans who are identifying as independent. And 59% of Americans, according to our polls, are open to a moderate unity ticket. And I think that just creates that opening as we see the two nominees coming down the pathway.
You say it's a different time, but it would be conceivably the same names on the ballot, the same individuals with the same histories, and presumably the same patchwork of red states and blue states. How does it change the formula from getting thrown off by a few important molecules if a third person drew votes away from one side or the other?
It's a sequel that no one asked for. You've heard that before. And the last poll that I saw showed, Biden trailing Trump by 6 points. And what I've learned and experienced firsthand is Donald Trump usually runs ahead of the polls. And so whatever those polls are, unless Biden is leading that. So it's one of the reasons that pulled me into this and doing this, because I don't want to see President Trump back in the White House. And I'm not confident that Biden can beat him. And I see Americans, scratching their heads right now thinking like, this is the United States of America, and these are the two best options we have. After 4 years, we're back to square one. Most people are thinking that, and we're saying that out loud.
Let me follow up on that. First, let me play a clip of what Larry Hogan said to Face the Nation recently about a flooded zone of candidates. Take a listen.
I didn't want to have a pile-up of a bunch of people fighting. Right now, you have Trump and DeSantis at the top of the field. You're soaking up all the oxygen, getting all the attention, and then a whole lot of the rest of us in single digits. And the more of them you have, the less chance you have for somebody rising up.
Making unequivocal the argument, you have more candidates, the more you increase Donald Trump's odds, because he has what is deemed to be a foundational support that is impenetrable. Wouldn't the same hold true in a general election?
Well, look, I think it appears that the more and more Republican candidates that jump in, the more they're auditioning for vice president, right? Or boosting their own name ID. But the truth is, we're at a point where we see Trump and Biden coming down the pathway. And what we're trying to do is, across the entire country, secure ballot access so that if needed, if necessary, Americans have the option and the alternative to vote for someone different, a moderate, independent unity ticket.
You need a candidate to have a third-party
Right.
run. Have you talked to Joe Manchin at all about this?
Look, any names that get floated right now are just mere speculation.
So you haven't had conversations with Joe Manchin about
No,
this?
I've had a conversation with Senator Manchin about this. And the fact of the matter is, any type of names are getting floated around, just ideas or whatever, but they're not being pushed by no labels because we don't even know if we're going to run a ticket yet.
Would that depend on who the candidate would be, whether you do this or not? Wouldn't it need to be a certain caliber person, woman or man, that you'd want to do this?
A lot of it depends on who the Democratic and Republican nominees are. I think we're going to have a good idea after Super Tuesday. That's why we've planned our convention for mid-April in Dallas, Texas, where we'll be making the decision if we run a ticket and who that ticket is. But right now, with Trump versus Biden and the majority of Americans want another option, wanting the freedom of choice, I think we should give that to them.
Do you envision, if you have a convention in April, if it's Biden and Trump, you have one of those, arena floors full of people with states and banners? Or is this a smaller footprint idea you're trying to execute, even in the best of circumstances?
Well, according to the polls, 59% of America is wanting something different than Trump versus Biden. So I think this movement and this momentum is growing by the day. Our numbers are not outliers. They're corroborated by polls that are released every single day. And so I hear that drum beating get louder and louder and louder as the weeks go by, days go by, and people look at President Biden and Trump, just barreling down toward their respective nominations. And America is craving something different.
Do you have the ability to touch the issue of abortion in a no-labels world? Because it's hard to find a third pathway on an issue that divisive.
Look, we're in the process of outlining some policy objectives, and they'll be coming out probably mid-July or so. And we're going to be touching on a whole range of issues, but we'll be releasing that probably the next month or so.
You've got to formulate a position on abortion in the next month.
We're going to be putting out a set of policies. I can't tell you specifically what all was in that and what is not in there, but I can tell you that in mid-July, we're going to be releasing some policy objectives. Yeah.
It's a lot of work ahead of you over the next few weeks. Joe Cunningham, get back to it. Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us in studio. Well, with investigations into former President Trump still ongoing, a former member of his legal team sits down with CBS News. How close we are to a charging decision in the Mar-a-Lago documents case coming up. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As a number of investigations looking into former President Trump continue, including two involving special counsel Jack Smith, a former member of Trump's legal team, sat down with CBS News this afternoon. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge spoke with former Trump attorney Tim Parler, and Catherine's joining us now here in studio. So he hasn't been part of the legal team since mid-May.
Yeah, just a few weeks.
But he had some insights.
Yeah, he absolutely did, Scott, and good afternoon. Parler told CBS News that he believes the Florida grand jury is a recent development and reflects an error by the special counsel team because until now, a grand jury has been meeting here in Washington to hear testimony. If charges are brought against the former president, Parler said he believes that some will be filed in Florida.
I think that Florida has the better venue for this. I think that if you bring it in D.C., you're giving a very big, juicy motion to dismiss.
Why so? Why so?
Because nothing, from everything I've seen, there's no allegations of any wrongdoing that's connected to D.C. or that happened in D.C. The government moved all the documents to Mar-a-Lago, not Donald Trump. He was still president when he landed in Mar-a-Lago. And then once he becomes a private citizen, and whatever happened thereafter, if they say that there's willful retention, whatever the evidence shows, they say that there is obstruction, whatever the evidence shows, all of that happened in Florida. Nothing happened in D.C. And so if you can't make a nexus argument as to any overt act that happened in Washington, D.C., then you don't have a case in Washington, D.C.
It would have to be brought in Florida.
It would have to be brought in
Based on
Florida.
the evidence that you've seen.
Yes.
Based on the Monday meeting at the Justice Department between the Trump attorneys and special counsel Jack Smith, Parler also believes a charging decision is imminent. Two sources close to the former president tell us that he is preparing himself for a possible indictment, Scott.
It's quite something. He's a former attorney, but he seemed to be able to forecast what the legal team is likely to do next. What is he forecasting?
Well, Parler also said to us that if there is an indictment, they have a well-developed response plan in place, including a motion to dismiss. So just to be clear, when you left former President Trump's legal team about 2 weeks ago, there was a plan in place if he were indicted.
Oh, sure. Any attorney in that situation would want to have a good plan in place. And I have every faith in Jim Trusty and John Rowley and Lindsay Halligan to execute that. Absolutely.
And when you left in mid-May, it was part of that plan to file motions to dismiss based on allegations of prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the specifics of what the plans were, and I'm sure that those plans have evolved since. But yeah, prosecutorial misconduct is a big issue that's infecting this case.
During his testimony to the grand jury here in Washington, Parler alleges that the special counsel prosecutor crossed the line, including on matters of attorney-client privilege. The special counsel's office has declined to comment on these allegations to CBS News.
So we hear the phrase imminent being used. Charges could be imminent. I know there's a literal definition to that word, but it's used more loosely in Washington, D.C. What's your sense of it? Based
on our reporting here at CBS News, when people say it's imminent, they're really talking about a charging decision at the outside within weeks. But there really is a sense right now, Scott, that this case is on the rim and it could move, in fact, extremely quickly, even in a matter of days.
I think it's worth underscoring the significance in the difference between filing a case in Washington, D.C. in the federal system and filing one in the Southern District of Florida. Explain the significance of that contrast.
Well, based on the evidence and what we heard from Parler, he's making the case, and he's seen a lot of the evidence to date, that it would make the most sense to bring charges if you're looking at obstruction or the unlawful retention of national defense information, to do it sort of at the scene of the crime, which is in Florida, not in Washington, D.C. He also indicated that if charges were brought in Washington, the Trump legal team would move to dismiss. Final thing, I think, is when you start to consider the jury pool, right? And that, I think, has to be foremost in the special counsel's mind in terms of making that decision and weighing the calculus of it.
We sure have seen the demography of the jury be important in the January 6 cases.
Correct.
Where D.C. juries have truly convicted every single defendant to go to trial. Certainly the Trump legal team is being mindful of where the jurors are and who the jurors could be.
Yeah, correct.
Catherine Herridge in studio. Great reporting.
Thank
Good
you.
interview. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
That does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.